things are just getting started, right? This is just the beginning. Tomorrow is going to be a busy day for those of you who are participating, and I know many of you are also have done this already before, and you're going to be table leaders and health partners to help other people be successful as well. It's something that we learn in school. It says you first see one done, then you do it yourself, then you teach somebody else how to do it. And once you get to the point where you can teach somebody how to do that, that's when you really got it down. You know, you're more likely to be successful if you can help other people understand the importance of this process. Thank you, David, and your wife Flo for hosting my wife and I this weekend. We had so many fine walks among the avocado groves. So I think we've already put in an hour and a half of hiking, and you can't hike without going up a hill. So my quadriceps are stronger this weekend already for just being here in Camarillo. All right, so we're continuing our theme of Diabetes Undone. Not just the potential to undo diabetes, but literally undo the primary causes of essentially most chronic diseases. That's exciting to me. If we can undo diabetes, in fact, Dr. Lowe and myself and others are involved with American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and we understand that if we're going to be successful in helping patients in any aspect of healthcare, we need to really know how to thoroughly address diabetes and reverse the underlying causes of diabetes. If you can do that, you can pretty much cover a lot of areas in healthcare because there's so much commonality. Last night we talked about the importance of how the underlying triggers of diabetes are also the same underlying triggers of a cardiovascular disease. We'll be emphasizing that tonight. It's also the underlying factors associated with the most common cancers. I'm going to be reviewing, assuming we get to that tonight, I'm going to be reviewing those studies. It's actually one of the primary drivers of headaches, insulin resistance. I'll tell you a story of a neurologist who was a classmate of mine who spent some time working with me, and she realized all these patients with headaches were getting better. We were treating them for diabetes, but their headaches were getting better. And as a neurologist, she picked up on this, and she said, "What's going on here?" I said, "Well, everything gets better." She says, No. Wes, you don't understand. I'm a neurologist. Headaches just don't get better. So there's something going on here. And she went on to do her doctoral research for her second doctorate in insulin resistance and how that resolved. By fixing insulin resistance, you can oftentimes fix the underlying causes of headaches. And she actually published a medical research paper on that and even wrote a book on this. Now she's a professor at UC Irvine. It has been for many years. And so we're good friends. So there's so many factors that we can address knowingly and sometimes unwittingly if we address insulin resistance. It's been said, if you want to really take care of your health, get diagnosed with a chronic disease and then manage it really, really well, and you actually are going to be healthier with the diagnosis of a chronic disease if you're addressing the causes of it than if you never had a diagnosis in the first place. So part of this is just us knowing what to do next. So let's just jump right into this continuing series. This is a study, a paper that was done some years ago, and this is 2009, and it was published by the American Diabetes Association because there had been for many years this nagging question about, well, what about people who've reversed their diabetes? What do we do with them? And the notion previously was once a diabetic, always a diabetic. There is basically no turning back. And as we discussed last night, that's kind of like saying that if somebody's obese, you can lose all that weight, but you're you're still obese. It's just illogical. You know, the lawyers in our audience would say that's really stupid, right? But for some reason, those of us in medicine seem to think that was, yeah, you're just going to be, you know, sick for the rest of your life no matter what. Well, so finally, they had a task force for, I don't know, it must have been 15 years. There was a task force that was looking into what to do about this, but they weren't moving very fast. And so finally in 2009, they actually published this paper. And so let's just read it real quick. The mission of the American Diabetes Association is to prevent and cure diabetes and to improve the lives of all people affected by diabetes. I agree with that mission 100%. We just need to make sure that we're actually following through with that mission in a proactive way. Well, they actually came up with a review of what criteria or guideline they recommended as to whether somebody has actually reversed their diabetes. So here it is. Number one, partial remission. Now let me actually point this. Partial remission is hyperglycemia, or basically high blood sugars, below the diagnostic thresholds for diabetes for at least 1 year's duration, while there's no active medical management or ongoing procedures, like additional procedures that would change the blood sugar levels. So remember, diabetes is defined by one thing and one alone, and that is how high the blood sugars are. And so there's actually 3 ways that we can determine whether somebody has diabetes. Number one is the least sensitive way, but the easiest way to diagnose this is with a hemoglobin A1C, that average blood sugar test over a 120-day period of how sugars attach themselves to the proteins in our blood. They caramelize to the proteins. They glaze. They glycosylate to those proteins and cause pathology. And so that's why I say the hemoglobin A1C, even though it's the least sensitive of all the diagnostic tests for diabetes, okay, in other words, it's going to take longer for that to actually show diabetes compared to the other tests, years and decades in some cases. Even though that's true, it's actually a wonderful test that everybody should get. I even have children getting that test. Why? Because it's actually a test of pathology. Blood sugar levels aren't a pathology test, but the A1C, because it's a glycosylation or a caramelization test, you're actually measuring pathology. You're measuring the degree to which sugar irreversibly caramelizes the protein, which means that that protein now has been completely changed in its structure, and has been damaged. It no longer does the job that it was designed to do. It has been warped, essentially. And so now it doesn't, the enzyme or the protein enzyme or other protein is no longer able to perform its biochemical function as designed. That's pathology. So the longer our blood sugars are high, the more likely that glycosylation, that caramelization takes place, and that can be measured by a hemoglobin A1C test. So that's, in my opinion, one of the best reasons to get that test, just to get an idea of how much sugar intoxication and pathological damage is being done to the proteins throughout our body, everywhere throughout our body. So the first test is hemoglobin A1C. Once your levels reach 5.7%, that's pre-diabetes. Once it reaches 6.5%, that's now full diabetes. But you can be at 5.6%, not even be pre-diabetic, and actually have diabetes diagnosed with other tests. Okay, so it's a great test. I recommend it for everybody, but it's the least sensitive test that we have. For instance, I alluded to this morning. A new study just came out this week showing that of 9,000 individuals that have participated in the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey in Haines. This is the government a government health and nutrition survey that evaluates diabetes risk and diabetes prevalence in the United States. And they found that if you just diagnose diabetes with a hemoglobin A1C, okay, which is a simple test. You don't have to be fasting. You can do it any time of the day. And again, all of us should have it, but it's not as sensitive. If you just use that test, you miss 73% of people who actually have diabetes. Did you catch that? Okay, in other words, if your doctor just tells you, well, we're not going to do all the tests, we're just going to check the hemoglobin A1C, oh, you're good. And I'll show you some examples today where they didn't even have pre-diabetes, but in fact they had full-blown diabetes with the other tests. The second test that we can use that's more sensitive than the hemoglobin A1C is the fasting blood sugar. And if the fasting blood sugar now reaches 100, that's the beginning of pre-diabetes. If it reaches 126, that's the beginning of diabetes. Now, what's interesting is a fasting blood sugar is more associated with liver health compared to an after-meal blood sugar is more associated with muscle health. And so that's why some people can have a higher fasting blood sugar but not as high after meals, or vice versa, depending on how the other organs of our body are functioning. Okay, so there's little clues along the way on how we use these tests. The third way, and the most sensitive way to evaluate and diagnose diabetes is by checking blood sugars after a meal, okay? Or in the case of diagnosis, checking blood sugars 2 hours after a 75-gram sugar drink, 300 calories of glucose. Okay, and so I have some people that get that sweet drink, and their blood sugars are sky high, and we come in, we talk about it, and then they say, yeah, but, doc, I would never drink something like that. Right? Because it's a sweet drink. It is. It's a sweet glucose carbonated drink that you get in the lab. And so to which I explain, it's actually only 300 calories. It's a medium soda. Okay? That's only 300 calories. Most of us can do that very easily. And if they're insistent that that's really not valid for them, we can actually do a food tolerance test, or say just we'll do it with your favorite soda and see what happens then, and the same thing happens, right? Same thing happens. I call it the Pepsi Jelly Bean Challenge. If you've read my book, Goodbye Diabetes, you'll recognize that I was teaching a wellness class at a university. This is some years ago. And this was a required class. Everybody, before they could graduate with a college degree, had to take this wellness class. And so we had people from all walks of life, and it was fun. I was mainly working at a clinic at the time. This was on the island of Guam, but I was given a little bit of time twice a week to go teach this class at the university because it was a different group of people. And these are college students in their late teens, early 20s. And so one of the things that we did to make this wellness class a really good wellness class is we did a Pepsi Jelly Bean Challenge towards the beginning of the class. This is a 10-week course. And so I said to them, 2 days from now at the next class, I want each of you to bring in your favorite drink, whatever, your favorite soda, and some cookies or crackers. And you need to figure out by looking at the labels how much carbohydrate and sugar you're getting. And there needs to be at least 300 calories of carbohydrate, of refined carbohydrates, essentially. And you want to basically, at the beginning of the class, I had a group of our nurses from our clinic come and check the blood sugars at the beginning, before they had the drink, and then 45 to 60 minutes after they had the drink. And And so some of them would say, well, I don't drink soda. Not very many of them said that. But I said, okay, so do you drink juice? Yeah, well, bring that. Okay, that can work almost as well. So it can go all the way to somebody who's only eating whole foods, and we can do it with beans and blueberries. Okay, so because that's still carbohydrate, and it's much healthier for you, but it still gives us an idea of the blood sugar rise after that exposure. So in this class, one of our students was 24 years old. He was a senior, and he was working his way through college. He was a business major, and he had confided in me that his uncle had an amputation due to diabetes. His grandfather had died of complications of diabetes after being blind for 10 years. And so he knew that he had a severe family history of not just diabetes, but all the complications that come with diabetes. And he was in college, right? So he was just talking theoretically. He wasn't thinking that he was at risk. Now, he was overweight. And as 2/3 of individuals in the United States are. And so he did this test. At the end of the hour, he came up to me, and he had this concern on his face, and he said, Doc, I need to talk to you after class. And I said, okay. And he showed me his piece of paper. So we kept it all confidential, so you don't have to share your blood sugars with anybody. But I'm going to explain to you what these blood sugars mean at the end of the class, and if you want to share it with others, you can. Share it with your family members, etc. And he just showed me the piece of paper without saying anything. And he says his 1 hour blood sugar after his favorite soda and crackers, 360. Okay? And so I said, you know what? Hang around for another hour. We'll check your 2 hour level. Just to see, because this 1 hour, while being the most sensitive of all tests for blood sugar, it's the most important test, because that you can have a high 1 hour and have a perfect fasting and a perfect 2 hour. Okay, but that high means you're going to have a problem. You're going to get that glycosylation from that high. So, but the diagnostic criteria require you to use a fasting or a 2 hour. So we waited another hour, got a 2 hour reading, and it was 230. So the 2 hour reading above 140 is pre-diabetic. The 2 hour reading above 199 is diabetic. Not borderline diabetic. Once you hit 200, you are diabetic based on those criteria. And that's the most sensitive of all tests. That'll catch the diabetes the earliest possible. So I encouraged him to go see his doctor, and he said, I don't have a doctor right now. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll order a lab for you, get a full glucose tolerance test with insulin values, and then take that information. Of course, I'm going to be with you for the next 10 weeks so we can manage this. He says, but I want you to get an appointment with your family's physician and get a full physical, which he chose to do. Good news is this. At the end of the 10 weeks, do you think that motivated him a little bit? Yes. At first he was just like, are you kidding me? I got to take this wellness class. I'm only reason I'm here is because I have to take it to graduate. And, they're going to make us walk and do exercises and read the stupid book. And, I actually graded them on whether they read the book or not. Actually, about 30% of the grade was if you read the chapter or not. Okay, I've gone through enough college classes and graduate classes to know that a lot of books never get opened. It might cost $150 for the book, but it never gets read. And so I said, you're not going to get through this class without reading this book. If you don't read this book, you're not going to even get a C. And so, of course, it was on the honor system, but we had quizzes too, so I could tell, what was going on. At the end of the 10 weeks, this 24-year-old senior had stopped smoking, 2.5 packs a day. Okay? He had learned why he wanted to stop smoking. Okay? He would not want to end up with an amputation that is caused by poor circulation. Okay? And more importantly, he had figured out how to deal with the stress in his life and the anxiety that the smoking helped relieve. When people smoke, they do it for a good reason. Some people get upset at me when I talk about there's actually good reasons. Let me rephrase that. There's benefits associated with smoking. If there wasn't any benefits, nobody would smoke, right? There's absolutely a benefit to smoking. But you also have to consider what's the downside. Okay, and that's where it gets us. The downside is huge. So what if you could get the same benefit that you get from smoking by doing something else that's actually good for you? And that's what wellness is all about. That's when you get on a good walking program. I'd said this morning, if somebody comes to me to stop smoking, I don't talk to them about smoking initially. I talk to them, let's fix the reasons you don't feel good that you need to smoke to feel better temporarily. And that comes from exercise, that comes from changing the diet, that comes from optimizing health in a broad way. He stopped smoking. He started exercising every day. He actually lost 30 pounds in that 10-week period. He had some weight to lose. He's a big guy. But he, at the end of the program, he came up to me and shook my hand and says, I want to thank you for putting me on the road to success. Because I didn't realize it at the time. I was a ticking time bomb, just waiting to blow up. And so you put me on the road, helped me see from my own blood what my risk was. And that's the beauty of doing blood tests. That's why I hope many of you are coming tomorrow morning and get the blood test with Dr. Lowe, because doing blood tests tells you what your body is saying. It's what we call the internal medicine, right? What's going on inside your body. You might look like you're doing okay on the outside, but when we draw that blood tells a story of what's happening inside your body, what's happening to your heart, what's happening to your brain, what's happening to your liver, to your kidneys, etc. So if you are able to drop your blood sugars and your A1C below the diagnostic criteria for diabetes, that's called partial remission, according to this guideline. Now, I actually disagree with this guideline. Okay? Either you have it or you don't. It's not partial. Okay? Their argument is that you still have prediabetes. Okay, then just call it prediabetes. So you've reversed diabetes and now you're pre-diabetic. But at least we have some guidelines that admit that diabetes is reversible. The second consideration, complete remission, is normal glycemia. In other words, you're not pre-diabetic anymore either, for at least 1 year without requiring a medication to get your blood sugars down. So, but my argument here would be to say that you have to say that before you can say you've reversed diabetes, that you have to also reverse pre-diabetes. It's like saying, if you're obese, okay, you can't say you're normal weight, okay? You can't say you reversed the obesity until you've actually no longer even overweight. So again, that's not logical. But again, we have criteria that we're using that we are able to use based on the top medical journals that can tell whether somebody has reversed their condition or not. And then prolonged remission. Complete remission for at least 5 years. Okay, so there it is. That's the new criteria that are out there. Now, there was an interesting study that was published in 2014 called The Remission of Diabetes in Adults with Type 2 Diabetes, the Diabetes and Aging Study. Now, this was actually this was done at Kaiser. a large community of ethnically diverse patients. And I don't know which community in Kaiser, but so there was almost 23,000 individuals that were being followed according to usual care. Okay, now usual care is another way of saying standard of care. In other words, the doctors at Kaiser, just like doctors at any large institution, were following the guidelines very precisely that are given to them by the American Diabetes Association, the American Medical Association. When somebody comes in with this level of blood sugar, they will recommend that you do this and this and this. They recommend you start this medicine. You'll get a pat on the back on the way out of the office saying, by the way, it'd be good if you got some exercise, maybe lost a little weight, try to eat a little bit better. But essentially the focus was medication management. Okay, so this is what they discovered. This is the beginning of the article, which was really well written. It says, widely believed that type 2 diabetes is a chronic progressive condition which at best can be controlled but never cured. And that once treatment with glucose-lowering medications is initiated, it is required indefinitely and is intensified over time. Yes, that's status quo. That is essentially the way care is provided most of the time. However, they said, I'm glad they put this in there, a growing body of evidence from clinical trials and case control studies has reported the remission of type 2 diabetes, another way of saying reversal, another way of saying undone, okay, in certain populations, most notably individuals who receive bariatric surgery. It's kind of interesting how they focused on that. And so what they did is say, let's actually look at how common it is to actually reverse diabetes in a usual care group. Okay? So this is very valuable information. And so here's what they found. So it's a 7-year study. They looked at partial remission by their own guidelines. 1.47% of participants were able to get partial remission of diabetes. Now, does that encourage you? Hey, let's all do diabetes undone, and we can get almost 2% of you to get partial remission. Boy, how'd you like to be the marketing person to promote that program? And then, well, when it came to complete remission, it was 0.14. In other words, actually reversing diabetes. Not just reversing diabetes to pre-diabetes, but actually getting rid of diabetes and pre-diabetes. That was 0.14%, or only 1.5, just under 1.5 out of 1,000 participants who had diabetes. Okay, that's kind of deflating even further, right? Okay, and then prolonged remission, it was less than 1 out of 10,000. Okay, and I'm thinking as I'm reading this, what's their point? What are they trying to totally, demoralize the population into not trying at all? Because that's kind of the message I got from it. It says, like, if somebody says to you or even suggests to you that you could possibly reverse your diabetes or getting rid of pre-diabetes, don't bother. Okay, look at the data. If these were odds in Vegas, would you put some money on the table? You'd be foolish to, right? So now, there was a little bit of a silver lining in this demoralizing cloud, that those who had been diagnosed with diabetes just in the last 2 years, within the last 2 years, in other words, they're relatively new diabetics, it's early diabetes, and it hasn't gone on for years, the rate of remission was actually almost 5%. What? Well, that's only good compared to the other data. You know, compared to what should be possible, it's still, you know, would you go and get into an 8-week course, okay, and do all this blood work on Sunday morning and change your diet and start an exercise program for the opportunity to get 5%, that 5% of you will be successful? Yeah, I don't think I would. So that was the study. Now, I'm actually showing you the very slides that I'm going to be using to present to a continuing medical education course that the American College of Lifestyle Medicine is going to be putting out at the end of this year for physicians and health professionals all over the world. Because it's a 15-hour course certifying doctors and other health professionals and being experts at reversing diabetes. Not playing games, not managing diabetes, not placating symptoms, not saying, well, here's one more medication, hopefully this will bring your blood sugars down a little bit. Why is that so important? Here's why. Because study after study has shown, and this has been reviewed now by a major review paper by Mayo Clinic, that if you're primarily trying to control blood sugar by using medications, you're actually increasing your risk of premature death and premature disability, not improving it. Okay, and that's pretty much, that's the point. Now, which is completely opposite to what they say is going to happen by taking that medicine. Their point, not my point, this is Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic is saying the guidelines, 95% of the guidelines that say if you just take these medicines and lower your blood sugar, okay, are actually wrong because they apply to type 1 diabetics, not type 2 diabetics. Okay? And they even go so far as to say we need to stop focusing the care of diabetes, the management of diabetes, by simply lowering blood sugars because it is not working. Oh, it's lowering blood sugars, but to what effect? Now, you would think if you just lower your blood sugars with a medicine, that's actually going to improve your risk. I used to think that too. I used to talk about it all the time, but that's not what the research says anymore. Okay? The research is saying, no, that's actually not true. That was based on extrapolation from type 1 diabetic studies. In other words, it's not how well you control your blood sugars that really matters. It's how you control your blood sugars that matters. I mentioned last night, I would rather have a high blood sugar most of the time, but be on an optimal diet and an exercise program and be taking care of my health in that respect than to have perfect blood sugars and not be on a good wellness program. I think I would live longer and healthier even with higher blood sugars if I was doing the right thing. Now that's an analogy. It doesn't have to be that. We don't have to choose between those two. But I'm just saying for the 5-10% of individuals who still struggle, even on a healthy program, with blood sugars, hold on. Don't be discouraged, because what you're doing, the process of wellness, is far more important than the number. We still pay attention to the number, okay, and look for other ways to address that, but we're not focused on the number per se. All right, now here's as a counter argument to this huge study with over 100,000 people that essentially says to most doctors who look at the study, don't waste your time trying to help patients to reverse their diabetes. Just manage them according to the guidelines. And of course, if you do that, you're going to get that 1.4% of partial remission, okay, or less, right? So this is actually a data of 16 individuals that were in the last group that I ran with a program called Diabetes Solutions, using the same principles with Diabetes Undone. But this is like an online course that is highly targeted to people that are really way out of control. And so you see the A1C levels before and after. See dramatic changes. The average change was from 7.7 down to 6, and this is in a 3 to 4 month program. Okay, roughly. Most of these are 3 to 4 months. Some of them are longer. Okay, and then you see the blood sugars before fasting blood sugars before they started the program, and then when they finished the program, and the 2-hour readings, etc. Just dramatic changes. Even the insulin levels here. Look at the fasting insulin. So it's very simple to actually run a fasting insulin test, because you just right along with all your other tests, you're checking the blood for what your actual insulin production is, how much insulin is flowing through your bloodstream right then and there at the same time as we're checking your fasting blood sugar. The amount of insulin in your blood fasting is a very unique determiner of how insulin resistant you are. So let me just talk about these for a little bit. This first one is actually John McMahon. How many of you watched I Thrive? Anybody? Nobody? A few of you. Okay. John McMahon interviewed me about 1.5 years ago. Because he wanted to, and he was interviewed about 80 doctors or health professionals for this program that was online called I Thrive. And when I first, he called me up. He was at the Plantrician Project here in Anaheim, I believe. And he said, "Hey, can I come to your office?" So I said, "Yeah, I'm done at 5 o'clock." He said, "Hey, I'll show up at 5:30. We spent 4 hours. He spent 4 hours interviewing me by video, as he had so many other doctors. And he basically spent a year putting together this documentary that kind of journaled his experience with diabetes. Now, he was wearing a boot because, he lived in Pismo Beach, and he had such bad neuropathy from diabetes, out-of-control diabetes, that he had gone one Friday night to the beach and was sitting at a fire pit, and probably eating things and drinking things that he shouldn't be, because this is before he was actually doing anything about his health, and stayed there for about 45 minutes. And then decided to go back home. He just lives just a block or two off the beach, so he walked back home, and he was walking around and came back to the room where he'd walked into the house, and there was blood all over the floor. And he saw that wherever he had walked, there was blood everywhere. And at first he was like, "What? There's an animal crawl in here after an accident? Where's all this blood coming from?" And then he noticed that it was basically his tracks, and he looked down to his foot, and without realizing it, he had barbecued his foot. And it was just cracked open and black and bleeding everywhere. He had such bad neuropathy, he had absolutely no feeling. And he had literally barbecued his foot. And so now for many, many months, he could have lost his foot. And so he's kind of walking around, videotaping all these doctors for this I Thrive program. Well, so these are his numbers right here. His fasting insulin was 20. Now, at minimum, by the way, I first started checking insulin levels in 1990. Yeah, 1990. Because Dr. Nancy Bohannon from UCSF, University of San Francisco. She's one of the best-known endocrinologists, diabetes doctors, that published hundreds of studies, and she did a talk for what was back then, that was when cassettes were popular, in 1990, and there was a cassette of the month for family practice update. So family practice physicians would get, who signed up for the service, would every month you'd get the lecture of the month. This is the new hottest stuff. And so Dr. Nancy Bohannon, as an endocrinologist, was talking about the new thing was being aware of patients' insulin levels, and that fasting insulin levels should never be above 10. They should never be above 10 in the bloodstream when measured with the fasting glucose. And John's was 20. Now 10 is the minimum, or the maximum, I would say. The recommended levels for fasting insulin is less than 7. Ideal is less than 5, assuming the blood sugars aren't crazy high, right? The higher your blood sugars are, the more insulin you're going to need to try to compensate for that. Okay? But the goal is to have good blood sugars and healthy levels of insulin, or adequate insulin to control blood sugar, but not so much insulin that establishes the fact that you are now insulin resistant. If your cells, your muscle cells, your liver cells aren't absorbing sugar very well, what that means is the pancreas has to produce more insulin to compensate for the insulin resistance of the cells. And so that's why measuring your blood levels of insulin is the most sensitive measure of insulin resistance that we have clinically for without doing insulin clamp tests, which no doctor is going to do unless they're doing research. So his insulin levels were basically 4 times above optimal. And look at his fasting blood sugars, 165. So even with a sky-high fasting blood sugar, his insulin levels at 20 wasn't able to compensate for that insulin resistance. So John was both insulin resistant, and his pancreas was already showing that it was losing its ability to produce adequate amounts of insulin to control blood sugars. This is really important to understand. Even before you're fully diagnosed with pre-diabetes, your pancreas has lost up to 60% of its function, its ability to produce insulin. That's before you're even diagnosed with pre-diabetes. And 90% of people with pre-diabetes don't even know it. Okay, so you can imagine by the time somebody's diabetic, the pancreas has really lost the ability to produce optimal amounts of insulin, even though it's still producing a lot of insulin. It's just its reserve capacity has been dwindled. Why? Because those cells that make insulin are being destroyed every day. This is another one of the commonalities between type 2 diabetes, okay, and type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's, right? Type 2 diabetes of the pancreas. Okay, so because the body's attempt to kill off low-grade infections is causing a destruction of the very cells in the pancreas that make insulin, or causing a destruction of the very cells in the brain that allow us to hold on to short-term memories. Okay, so we want to fix that underlying problem. And this is a great example of how that's possible. So after the program, John was started at 20 insulin, now he's 4. The fasting blood sugar dropped from 165 to 81. Okay, the 2-hour insulin went from 200 to 122, which is essentially perfect. Okay, so that was John's, and I'll have more information on him in a little bit. There's other patients here. Look at this one. The A1C dropped from 9.1, that's really high, to 5.3. Now, by the A1C criteria, this patient no longer has even pre-diabetes. Now, what's interesting is look at this. Fasting blood sugar dropped from 211 to 87. So she didn't have even pre-diabetes by a fasting blood sugar measure either. Dramatic improvement in insulin resistance, dramatic improvement in even beta cell function. But look at the rest of this. This is a really interesting case study. The 2-hour blood sugar initially at baseline was 436. No wonder her A1C was so high. No wonder that caramelization effect was so powerful. And the pathology, the risk of complications at that point was so great for her. Okay, now, but that dropped almost 200 points to 251. Now, that's still technically diabetic, right, based on the 2-hour criteria. But that's after a pure sugar drink, and that's the difference. See, so her pancreas improved dramatically in its ability to function, but it still has lost over the decades so much reserve, beta cell insulin-producing reserve, that when re-exposed to a high level of sugar, blood sugars go sky high. But as long as she doesn't do that anymore, she's essentially not a diabetic. She has the underlying reserve challenge of those beta cells, but by eating properly and exercising appropriately and following these diabetes undone principles, she is essentially able to now live and be healthy like a non-diabetic, not having any of the complications typically associated with diabetes, because her blood sugars don't rise enough to cause that pathologic damage that is typically seen with a higher A1C test. Okay, so that put her on notice that while she had reversed her diabetes by those common criteria, more common criteria, she still had an underlying predisposition and tendency. But knowing that if she just stayed on the program, if she followed what she'd already learned, she didn't have to worry about the complications. That's really good news. Okay, so in the end, in just this one little group that we ran over the summer, 67% of individuals in the program were able to fully reverse their diabetes. Is that a little bit better than the other study? Yeah, just a little bit. Okay, do you think that's worth publishing? Yeah. Okay, so why though? Because they weren't following usual care. They weren't following these guidelines that are not personalized in any way, that are just saying, hey, just take more. If your sugars are higher, just take more medicine. To what effect? Increase risk, not decrease risk. Okay. So how we go about doing this is critical. 80% who had an A1C equal to or above 7 now were below 7. 71% who were at 8 or higher dropped at least 1.5 points on the A1C. So here's the actual picture of John's thong on Pismo Beach that one night. Okay, look at all that blood oozing and oozing all over the floor. So this was John. A1C, interestingly, wasn't all that high. It was at 7.2. At the end of the program, actually a year in this case, 4.9. Super low. Super low. Now, I think some people just run lower on the A1C test. Okay, because if all I knew about John was an A1C of 7.2, I wouldn't expect him to have neuropathy at the level that he did. Okay? Either that or he's just super sensitive to nerve damage, which is also possible. But I see a lot of people who run really low on the A1C when in fact their blood sugars after meals are going sky high, as John's did as well. So look at what happened to his weight. Before he started the program, 312. At the end of 1 year, 213. 99-pound drop. Triglycerides dropped from almost 500 to 100. Cholesterol plummeted. No medicine there. No medicine required. Okay, and then here's his fasting blood sugar, his 1 hour blood sugar, and his 2 hour blood sugar. Okay, now let's keep going here. So here's the initial test. So you see, so what we did in this group is we not only checked a 4-hour glucose tolerance test, but which is blood sugars at fasting, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. But we also checked the insulin level the whole time, because they're in this comprehensive group to figure out what's going on with beta cell function in the pancreas. And so we already talked about his fasting insulin. Look how his insulin levels went up to 53, but look at his 1-hour blood sugar, almost 300. So even though initially his pancreas was producing a lot of insulin, it actually wasn't enough to compensate for the high blood sugars. It wasn't close to enough. So he already has beta cell pancreatic failure to a large degree at this baseline test. He's just not able to produce enough insulin to compensate for the level of insulin resistance that he has. Okay, then this is after what he did is he went to a medical facility that helped him do a month-long fast, a medical fast, which I don't usually recommend, but that's what he did. His inflammatory values in his blood just skyrocketed during the fast. He survived it, and look what happened. Everything improved, but he still has a very high insulin level here, but a much better 1-hour blood sugar. He actually lost about 30 pounds during that 1-month fast. All right, so it had a lot of benefits for him, even though it was a little bit risky. All right, now let's keep going. This is the beginning. So December 2017, we already reviewed. Roughly a month later, we reviewed here, and then this is 4 months later and a year later. Look at that blood sugar curve compared to the initial one. Fasting blood sugar 78, 1 hour 119 with an insulin of 22. In other words, now because of what John did in following the 100% plant-based diet and following a good exercise program, addressing the sleep issues, doing the whole Diabetes Undone sequence essentially, because of what he did, now his pancreas is actually working much better, and yet the pancreas doesn't have to produce nearly as much as it used to have to produce. So even though it's capable of producing a lot more insulin to control blood sugars, because of his choices, he now has a very balanced level of blood sugar to insulin. And look how low those insulin levels are. Why is this important? Why is it important to have less insulin floating through our bloodstream? There's quite a few reasons. Number one, insulin, when elevated, is, as I suggested last night, is one of the main drivers of cancer, is one of the main drivers of heart disease, is one of the main drivers of Alzheimer's. One of the ways that insulin drives Alzheimer's risk or cognitive decline risk is that after a meal, well, let me rephrase it. When insulin goes up like it did here at the baseline, it goes up to 53. This should be at least under 30. But I have patients that are all the way up to 300-400 on insulin. In other words, the pancreas is really strong. So I say, hey, there's good news and bad news. Good news is your pancreas is really on it. Man, your pancreas can crank out that insulin. Here's the bad news. If you keep cranking out that much insulin every day, at some point your pancreas is going to fail. But in the meantime, you're producing so much insulin, you're dramatically increasing your risk. You're fanning the flames of cancer, heart disease, and dementia. Okay? We got to address the underlying issues. One of the ways it works is that as insulin goes up, there's an enzyme in the brain and in the body, the rest of the body as well, called insulin-degrading enzyme, IDE. This enzyme is breaking down insulin. You see here, even before he's on his health program, John has had an insulin of 53, and then it drops to 25. primarily because he can't produce that much insulin. But as soon as you make that insulin, the insulin-degrading enzyme is breaking down that insulin. Why? Because if it doesn't break it down, that excess insulin is going to drive your blood sugar so low in your blood that now you're going to go into coma and die. So if you didn't have insulin-degrading enzyme to break down that insulin right away, you would end up being super low blood sugar, and that's bad, bad news. It's far, far worse for your health to have low blood sugars than to have high blood sugars. Your brain literally can't operate if you have a low blood sugar. I know I've been there. I've been, when I was in college and I was running track, if I didn't do it properly, I'd get such low blood sugars that I could walk but not talk. That's really bad. Okay, so that's one reason I understand the relationship about how low blood sugars are really bad for the brain. So, but here's the problem. You know what one of the major jobs is of the insulin-degrading enzyme? You could actually call this enzyme by a different name. You could actually call it beta-amyloid degrading enzyme. In other words, once beta-amyloid has done its job to fight infections and toxins in the brain, okay, it tends to accumulate. And the body is supposed to remove that. That's what happens during sleep. The brain literally constricts. The hemispheres just get tight like this and squeeze out beta-amyloid. Now, I wouldn't have believed that if I just heard some friend of mine tell me that story. But Dr. Rudy Tanzi, one of the top researchers in the world, professor at Harvard University in the Department of Neurology, that's exactly how he described it. When you're in deep sleep, the hemispheres of the brain literally constrict like a sponge getting squeezed. And it squeezes out the toxins in the brain. It removes the beta-amyloid plaques, the oxidized beta-amyloid that needs to be now, it's done its job. It's pus, essentially. It's pus in the body, in the brain, and you need to get rid of it now. It helps remove that. And if you don't sleep properly, that doesn't happen. And that's why, you know, we say we need to fix sleep. And I get a lot of rolled eyes when I say that, because they're basically saying to me, you have no idea the problem I have with sleep. And I'll say to you, yes, I do. I see patients all the time that struggle immensely with sleep. My point is this: we got to figure it out. Don't give up on it. Never give up on sleep issues, because unless we address sleep issues and get you sleeping more soundly so that you're getting at least 6, preferably 7, 8 hours of good sleep a night, your brain's not going to be as healthy. And as Dr. Lowe suggested earlier this evening, if you're not getting good sleep, the very next morning you're more insulin resistant. Just staying up 3 hours later than usual, on like a Saturday night, for instance, okay, will make you much more likely to be diabetic the next morning. This is for non-diabetics. In other words, you can fluctuate between being diabetic and non-diabetic because of the insulin resistance that's being driven in part by inadequate sleep. So we got to figure that one out, okay, and put time and effort into it. So the insulin-degrading enzyme is removing beta-amyloid oxidized plaques. But if it's spending all its time getting rid of excess insulin, guess what? Can't do both. So when you are insulin resistant, which most of us are to some extent, and I really mean most of us, I'm talking about 80% of the average individual have some level of insulin resistance, which means that they're producing more insulin. We are producing more insulin than we should have to, especially after meals, and especially after snacks that aren't healthy, and especially if we're not doing light exercise right after meals to get those muscles sucking up that sugar. So now the pancreas doesn't have to make that extra insulin to try to compensate. Okay, so that excess insulin that we have after every time that we eat, that is an impairment, a impediment in the ability of the insulin-degrading enzyme to be cleaning the brain out of that beta amyloid plaque. Okay? So that's another reason that this is so important. Okay. I just did a video show with John a couple of weekends ago, and here's a picture of him climbing Half Dome. Now, a year before, he was in a boot, almost lost his foot because of horrible neuropathy. And even after reversing his diabetes, he would confide in me. He says, man, I'm so happy about my diabetes is gone, but I still don't have any feeling in my foot. Is this going to get better? And I would keep saying to him, you know what? Never give up. There's always hope. There's always the potential to improve that. And so we did other nutritional strategies, try to optimize neuropathy on top of what he'd already done. And just 2 weeks ago, while he was on the video show that we did, he said, hey, last night I couldn't sleep very well. And usually that's not a good thing, right? But this was a good thing. He says, you know why? It's because I had this weird sensation in my foot. I had this prickly needle sensation in my foot, which usually is the sign of early neuropathy. But when you're reversing a neuropathy that has been so bad for so many years, you have absolutely no sensation left, and you start feeling that prickly, hot sensation in your feet, that means the nerves are coming back, baby. That's what it means. And so he knew that because we had talked about it. This is going to happen. Just hold on. The longer you stay on the right program, the nerves takes a while for them to grow back, right? But if you give them half a chance, if you're doing everything that's reasonable, addressing every single risk factor that we can think of, there's a great chance that those nerves eventually will start growing back and healing to the point where you can start feeling pain again. That's a good thing, because now that he can feel pain, what's the chance of him barbecuing the other foot at Pismo Beach tonight, when he's out with his friends? No, because now he can feel that, right? Pain is a blessing. It gives us an opportunity to protect ourselves. And now his nerves are coming back. Okay, so this is the 10 stages of high blood sugar. This is an educational tool that is a powerful tool to better understand where we are and then do pre and post testing. So, for instance, John, when he first started, his fasting blood sugar was 165, and so he was at the high end of stage 6 high blood sugar. Okay, pre-diabetes starts at stage 3. There's 2 stages of high blood sugar that come before pre-diabetes. Did you know that? Well, this is actually just something that I developed along with it was a CDC grant and published by the Department of Public Health Services back in 1997. I developed the first 5 stages, up to the diagnosis of diabetes. And then working with John Vargas in the Diabetes Solution Program that uses the diabetes undone emphasis, we realized that we needed to have an additional 5 stages, which are the increasing severity of diabetes. Why? Because there's a lot of people that are running 300. Okay, they need to know that that's stage 10. That's not just diabetes. That's stage 10. That's 5 stages past diabetes, the initial diagnosis. And so he went from stage 6 to stage optimal. Stage optimal. Okay? His A1C went from stage 6, 7.2, to 4.9, stage optimal. Now, I would actually put, for a lot of people, 5.1 in the optimal range. So if I had to redo this, I would put 5.1 into optimal range. And then 5.2, 5.3 would be stage 1 and so forth. It's really good for when we do testing on our labs to actually go to these stages and say, okay, where am I right now? Okay, on each of these, and where do I want to be? And now we have some goals. I mentioned last night, or even this morning, that we focus so much on the tip of the iceberg, right? And we should focus on the tip of the iceberg, but we should not let that or preclude us from looking at that huge mammoth part of the iceberg that flows underneath the ocean surface. 90% of the problem is right here, not here. That's just a symptom of the problem. This is insulin resistance. This was a lot of us have because we have no tip of the iceberg. You know, there's a lot of icebergs out there. You can't see them. They're floating under the surface of the ocean. Okay, so here's a patient that I just had on Thursday. This is my last patient Thursday. And she actually watched the iThrive program. That's how she learned about this test. And look at her fasting. This is her hemoglobin A1C done just about a month ago. And it was 5.4. The lab that she used messed up, and so they did all her labs again free. So then a month and a half later, she was 5.3. Would most people be concerned about a hemoglobin A1C of 5.4, 5.3? Okay, let's go back here. 5.3 is stage 1, just slightly above optimal. Stage 2, okay, but not even pre-diabetes. So most doctors would say, oh, man, you're good. You know, you don't need to do anything. You're perfect. Okay, well, let's see if she was indeed perfect. Look at her fasting blood sugar here, 91. They forgot to do the insulin test here at 1 hour, so they redid it. The fasting blood sugar here is 78. That's perfect. The fasting insulin, 6.9. We'd say that's pretty close to optimal. Look at our blood sugars at 1 hour, 228, almost 200 here. The first time was at 221. By definition, using a glucose tolerance test, this lady has type 2 diabetes, but it's kind of a silent type 2 diabetes. She's a very health-conscious person. And look at her insulin levels. They don't rise initially enough, but then they spike here. But even though she's producing a lot of insulin, she's not able to control that after a meal, after sugar drinks spike in her blood sugars. So this is the value of this type of testing, is that it gives us clues of what our real tendencies are. And so she was so excited about learning this about herself that she actually brought her mother from Las Vegas and her sister, and we spent the whole afternoon together in my office going through all three of them because she wanted her family, her mother and her sister, to go through the same experience to make sure that if there was any insulin resistance, they were all getting rid of it. Okay, so we've talked about the exposome, right? The exposome is everything that we're exposed to, everything in our environment, the things that we do, the things that we eat, the things that we drink, the things that we're exposed to, and the things that we think. Just thinking changes the way your genes express themselves. We kind of talked about that this morning some. And so our exposome is critical. Now, this is one of my favorite authors is Dr. Sid Baker. He's a professor of medicine at Yale University, retired now. But I love listening to him. I think of him as the Norman Rockwell of medical professors. And he has these truisms, which he calls the thumbtack rules. And he said, if you're sitting on a tack, it's going to take a lot of aspirin to make you feel good. So if you're all about symptomatic management of disease, you see the fallacy by this truism that Dr. Sid Baker explains. And then the corollary to that is if you're sitting on 2 tacks, removing just one of them does not result in a 50% improvement of your pain. So when we're seeking to undo diabetes, when we're seeking to reverse any chronic condition, we need to be addressing the multiple thumbtacks. We can't just get rid of one thumbtack and go like, look, I found the reason I have this problem. I've gotten rid of it, but this doesn't work. And so after a while, you become discouraged and you buy into the lie that there's really no hope, that this doesn't work. I've got rid of thumbtack after thumbtack. The problem is I haven't got rid of them all at the same time. You can't just experiment with this thumbtack. Oh, now that feels a little bit better. No, I still got pain. Well, I'm going to put that back one in, and then I'm going to get rid of the other thumbtack. Right? That's what we do so often. We got to get rid of all the thumbtacks if we're going, or at least most of them. In health, in healing, we actually don't have to get rid of every single one. Why? Because if we get rid of most of them, the body has an innate ability to remove the other ones. Okay, but our job is to find as many of those thumbtacks as possible to clear them, so now the healing process can take place naturally. This is what would happen if you're sitting on a lot of thumbtacks. Okay, so if we had to narrow down, and I'm going to be taking questions here in a little bit. If we had to narrow down the 2 most important things that we want to do to improve our health, okay, this would be it. Again, Dr. Sidney Baker from Yale University School of Medicine. Optimal health and the potential to heal requires that we provide all the necessary elements to optimize the system and remove any interfering elements. Those are the 2 things that we got to do. So no matter if we're following like the Bredesen protocol to reverse dementia or aspects of dementia, or regardless we're following the Dean Ornish protocol to reverse heart disease, very similar in concept, by the way. The bottom line is test broadly, do everything that's reasonable to help improve the body physiology. Okay? That's essentially, the Bredesen protocol is nothing more than expansion on what Dr. Dean Ornish did 25 years ago, showing that heart disease was indeed reversible. But his whole approach was, let's do everything that's reasonable. Not just one thing. He didn't just do diet. Okay, in fact, Ornish would say diet wasn't the most important piece. I've heard him say that many times. Not that it's not important, it's critically important. He would say dealing with stress is the number 1 most important piece. But as I said this morning, what's the first thing that we do to address stress? Address the diet. So they all come together. They all come together. So, the 2 most important qualities. So, nutrients are the necessary elements. Okay, and nowhere are you going to do better than by looking at these colors, these deep, rich colors, which, as I've said before many times, it's in the color of the foods. It's in the pigment of the foods themselves that healing comes from. It's in these very pigments, these colors that you see here, that when consumed, they get into your system and they change the way your genes work. They change the way your genes express themselves, turning off the bad genes and turning on the good ones. Each one of us has the capacity to heal if we are able to turn on enough of the good genes and turn off enough of the bad genes. That's the principle. That's why it's so critical that we have to have a high nutrient diet. That's why I love the work of Dr. Joel Fuhrman, because that's his whole emphasis. Dr. Joel Fuhrman says, you got to get nutrients. You got to get high nutrient points, because if you don't, even if you're eating clean, you're not getting the therapeutic benefit that you might need to reach that tipping point where healing takes place. And this comes from the colorful greens and other colorful non-starchy vegetables. That should be the core of the diet that we expand from. Okay, and then toxins are the interfering elements. Where do most of our toxins come from? Yeah, they come from a lot of sources, but a lot of the toxins that we get that build up in our body day after day, meal after meal. That's a clue. Most of our toxins come from the foods that we eat. Right? And in part because of the way the food has been treated, or the plants have been treated. And so that's another reason we need to understand our genes. Because as I do genomic studies on almost every patient, I look at the PON1 gene, which I call the pony gene. And I tell my patient, just visualize a pony running through a toxic waste dump. And there's barrels of pesticides that have rusted open and are leaking all over this pony as it's running through the toxic waste dump. If you have a mutation to the pony gene, PON1, your ability to break down pesticides goes way down, which means the ability of pesticides residue to build up within your system and chronically damage genes and tissues throughout your system goes way, way up. Do you want to know if you have the pony gene mutation or not? Okay, I would. Okay, why? Because if I have that mutation, I'm more likely to be careful about making sure I don't expose myself to these pesticides. Right? Knowledge is power. Okay, now knowledge allows us to act on these things appropriately. I got to tell you this one. Okay, and then I'll take questions after this. President Reagan was one of my favorite presidents. I just loved his jovial style. You know, there you go again. He just, he had this great way about himself, whether you agree with his politics or not. He was just a wonderful person, the way he carried himself. Unbeknownst to most of us during the last years of his presidency, he was really suffering, struggling with cognitive decline. The story is told, his daughter tells the story that they're in their home, and she's running some errands and walks by, and there's her father, President Reagan, standing in the living room, just standing there. And she goes up and says, "Dad, what are you doing?" And he says these famous 5 words or 6 words, I don't know where I am. He's standing in a living room in a home that he's lived in for many, many years, and he doesn't know where he is. Okay? This is an Alzheimer's dementia that, in my opinion, probably could have been prevented if he had been given better advice. Okay, if he had been given better advice, or if we'd known then what we know now. Maybe that's a better way to put it. This is not about victim blaming. This is about the opportunities to prevent these horrible situations like they've happened so many times in the past. Do you know what President Reagan's favorite food was? Yeah, jelly beans. In fact, there was a bowl of there's a bowl of jelly beans in every single room of the White House. Okay, where basically he would have, of course, people send him jelly beans from all over the world, right? Everybody knew he liked jelly beans. And it's an endearing thing. Oh, man, President Reagan, he likes jelly beans. He makes them more like us, right? Oh, yeah, he's like some of these simple things. But this is a major, major clue of what was going on with his health. You can see when somebody craves sugar, that means blood sugars are crashing. So you have some jelly beans to bring your blood sugar back up. What could be better? Right? What could be healthier than just bringing your blood sugars up to a healthier level? We all know the brain needs sugar, right? So give it some sugar. I've heard people actually say that. Here's the problem. When you eat that sugar, that immediately causes a rush of insulin flooding into the system to do what? To try to compensate for that rising sugar. And that extra insulin, you've already heard the story. It's going to drive, it's the number one driver, most common driver of Alzheimer's is a dysfunction in insulin resistance. And so it's sad that the last 10 years of Reagan's life were lived in this, where he's essentially lost in his own home. He's lost in his own body. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being in your home and not knowing anybody that's in your home, even though they're your own family, and thinking that you're actually a prisoner, that you're being held captive against your own will? Can you imagine the terror that can go through people's minds that they can't even communicate it? That we're suggesting from the latest research is preventable. Dr. Sherzai from Loma Linda, neurologist team, they're saying 90% of that is preventable, and I 100% agree. But I'm also seeing when my patients who already have dementia or already have significant cognitive decline, 80% of those individuals, by following a comprehensive program, are able to start reversing that. And so let me be clear what I mean by that. When I say start reversing that, they're actually reversing cognitive decline. They're not necessarily all the way over here perfect. Okay, they're not like John who reversed his diabetes, now it's perfect. But they are improving the functionality of their lives so powerfully that it's a huge difference. And that's really all that matters when we're dealing with dementia. All that matters is, can you be functional again? Can you live in your home independently? Can you live in your home with family and enjoy your family? And I say, so what if you forget what happened 20 minutes ago? If you can still enjoy your family, you're good. Now, maybe you can improve that memory as well, but the number one goal that we want to address with this diabetes undone concept is prevent progression of the cognitive decline that is so common in the United States and around the world today that essentially 50% of us, if we're lucky enough to survive into our mid-80s, will have Alzheimer's by that age. But that's only true if we fail to recognize our potential to address the cause and do it effectively now. So I'll take some questions now. I'll take some questions for the next 15, 20 minutes, and then you'll have a chance to maybe, for those of you that need to talk to Dr. Lowe with regards to, do we have mics for questions by chance? Okay, here. So, you know, I'll go wherever he goes, so you need to get his attention. And then if any of you do want to have a signed copy of either the Hello Healthy book or the Goodbye Diabetes book, we'll be able to stay by for about 20 minutes to sign some copies, and then we'll be off for a 3-hour drive. Yes?
Hello, doctor. Just wanted to ask you if diabetes is reversible at any age, even though grandpas, or anyone.
I'm sorry, say the first part again.
Oh, that diabetes is reversible, like at any age, 88, 89, 90.
Wow, you know, let me actually show you something real quick to answer your question. I'm shocked I don't have it in here. Let's see. I had in fact, about 6 years ago, I was being encouraged by my publisher to write a book on diabetes. Without realizing it, the real motivation was that the publisher's chairman of the board had a close friend that had out-of-control diabetes, and he wanted a book written on the latest information on how to reverse diabetes naturally. And so the chairman of the board was harassing my publisher to get it done, and he was harassing me to get it done, and so it took us 5 years, and we finally wrote it. The very first person that gets a copy of this book was Tom Zapara, the chairman of the board, a philanthropist who's donated many millions of dollars to universities around Southern California, and he read the book and immediately said, man, because he said, I need to know what I'm talking about. I need to, I can't just give this book to my friend and not know what I'm talking about. So he read the book, and he, as he read the book, he became convicted that, man, I better check myself. So he calls me up. He says, Wes, he talks real gruff like, Wes, I want to get this test done, and what do we need to do? And so I said, hey, I'll just write up the whole, so I wrote up he came in to see me, and we wrote up a whole set of labs, and comprehensive labs, and he went, he lives in Laguna Beach, and he went to a lab right there in Laguna Beach and drew all his labs, and we did the 4-hour glucose tolerance test, and he came in to see me, and he says, Wes, he says, don't sugarcoat this for me. I'm tell it like it is. And I says, I plan to. and then he says, so how am I doing? And he says, well, Tom, he says, you have out-of-control diabetes. And he went, what? He said, well, what are we going to do about this? And I said, I'm glad you asked, Tom. Because, see, he was a very successful businessman. And I love working with people who have been successful in some aspect of their life because they know how to adapt very quickly. Successful people, they know that when change is required, they don't fuss and fume and complain. They just get going. They just get started and let's fix this. His blood sugars were over 300 in the glucose tolerance test because he had out-of-control diabetes. He's 89 years old. 5 weeks later, he calls me up and says, Wes, I want to get tested again. I'm like, it's been 5 weeks. He says, okay, I'm going to be 90 years old in a week. I want to know before my birthday. I said, okay. So we did the tests again. He had already reversed his diabetes. His hemoglobin A1C has gone from 7.2 down to 6.2. So he still had prediabetes, but he had already reversed his diabetes. You want to know how he did that? Okay, he and his wife were right there in my office, and I said, hey, Tom, we can do this by phone. You don't have to be in my office. No, I want to see you tell me exactly what I need to do. I was like, okay. And so Tom says, give me now, what do I need to do? And I could tell, he was just going to do everything he needed to do. I had no qualms that he was going to be successful. And so he was retired. He was 90 years old, right? And he loved woodworking. So he'd work in his shop all day, and then whenever he felt hungry, he'd go make himself a sandwich and eat a sandwich. And if that was at 9:30 at night, that's what he did. And so he said, okay, we got to have structure to your diet. You got to eat breakfast, you got to eat lunch, and then a lighter evening meal. He says, well, what if I did 2 meals a day? I says, well, if you want to, we'll do that. I don't force people to eat 2 meals a day. But he decided to do a later breakfast and a later lunch. And I said, okay. So no snacking any other time. Done. No problem. We're on reversal mode, right? He says, just show me what I need to do, and I'm going to do it. I love that. And then he said, well, what else? He says, you need to start walking after meals. And his wife scowled at me. She said, have you seen him walk down the hallway of the clinic? He's like bouncing off the walls. He can hardly walk just in a house, but you want him to walk outside? And I said, well, Vi, this is the opportunity to go with him. Just hold his hand. And she scowled at me some more. But she did it. And I would have people calling me up from Laguna Beach because he would walk 1.8 miles around the loop in his closed community overlooking Laguna Beach every morning after breakfast, that postprandial, the after-meal exercise. And so he did those two things, okay, and then looked at some specific things that we did as well. But in 5 weeks, he'd reversed his diabetes. 90 years old. So at his 90th birthday party, he was celebrating. He got up and gave a speech about reversing diabetes. You know, and if I could do it at 90, you can do it at 65, you youngsters, right? And then 3 months later, he didn't have prediabetes anymore. A year later, his A1C is 5.1. 6 years later, his A1C is 5.1. He's 96 years old. The Laguna Niguel Church started a Diabetes Undone program about 6 weeks ago, and he was giving his testimonial at the very first program. He called me up last week and said, Wes, what else can we do? This is amazing. He says, I'm seeing other people reversing their diabetes. I want to tell my story. and so, you know, he's giving so many millions of dollars to Loma Linda University and La Sierra University that they actually did a video on how he had reversed his diabetes at such an old age. So age is not a factor. Age is not a factor in anything. Okay, so the factor is our willingness to do something about it. Yes. Yes, so I'm sorry. I'll follow the mic. So just get Dr. Lowe's attention. Yes, sir.
It all comes down to willpower, right?
Willpower and a willingness to just do the next step. You know, you don't necessarily have to have, you know, like one of my patients once told me, he said, Doc, if you tell me I got to eat barbed wire, I'm going to do it. I'm going to eat barbed wire. So we don't have to have we don't have to be the strongest person in the world to do this. We just have to have willingness to humble ourselves, okay, and be willing to follow the program, and even when we slip up, to get up and keep trying again. That's the key. Yes.
Okay, my question is in regards to sugar. Should we stay away from sugar altogether, or should we be moderate, or a little bit, or what's the issue there?
I wish I had time to show you another study here. Sugar is actually neurotoxic. Now, I'm not talking about the natural sugar found in fruit. I'm just saying when people eat refined sugar, especially in a regular meal where there's more refined sugar, okay, where you're eating pancakes and syrup or something like that, that is actually dementogenic. Not only does it cause your blood sugars to go high, but it causes your insulin levels to go high, but it actually changes the way the brain works. Studies out of UCLA have shown that mice fed fructose, just high fructose corn syrup with their water after 6 weeks, dramatically decreased ability to get through the maze that they once knew how to go through to get to the other end, to get their prize. And in fact, those mice who've been exposed to fructose for 6 weeks, it takes them twice as long to get through the maze than it does the other mice who have just been exposed to water and normal food as well. So the key here is to dramatically alter our consumption of sugar, so that in other words, is it necessary to have sugar? There's absolutely no necessity for sugar. What is necessary is that we eat lots of whole plant-based foods, because that's where the nutrients are. Not only is sugar dementogenic, but it also has no nutrients to supply to address the problem. So it depends on the person. I'm not going to say that you can ever have a little bit of sugar. I'm saying that we want to make sure first and foremost that our diet is rich in whole plant-based foods. And as we do more and more of that, it crowds out those tendencies that we have to have highly refined foods.
Sugar in natural foods, like we eating fruits and all this stuff already has sugar in it.
Well, and so again, whole foods, fruits, okay, when eaten appropriately in a balanced way with meals, not as snacks, are not going to stimulate the same insulin response and are not going to be as bad for cognition. But we need to be paying attention to our blood sugars, right? And so, some people could easily get too much fruit. Yeah, I've had years ago, 25 years ago, there was a patient at Kaiser. One of my colleagues was seeing him, and they checked the triglycerides level, and they were over 10,000. The blood fats, it should be under 100, and they were over 10,000. And he was a vegetarian. So like, what is going on? And so they did a careful survey of what he was eating, and it turned out he had grown a garden full of cantaloupe. And rather than sharing it with his neighbors and friends and coworkers, he ate it all. And cantaloupe is one of the healthiest foods you can eat, one of the highest nutrient scores of any food. But if you just eat cantaloupe, you're getting all that extra fructose, okay, in an unbalanced way. And if your metabolism and your liver have issues, your blood triglycerides and your blood sugars and your insulin levels are going to go sky high. So we got to eat everything in a balanced way. Okay, a couple more questions.
Okay, if you've gone through the class and you're applying these changes in your diet and you still have an underlying issue, you said something about doing genetic testing to see if you have a mutated gene or enzyme, something. That was this morning. How do you do that? What does the doctor do?
Well, most doctors aren't into genetics at the moment, but many, more and more are learning about, this is a whole new science. 15 years ago, we didn't have any of this, and now it's exploded. We call it nutrigenomics, the impact of nutrition on genomic expression. But so I spent, for the last 10 years, I've spent thousands and thousands of hours studying and trying to understand. It's like learning a new language. So you just need to work with somebody that understands it and can go through a report and pick out, based on their expertise, where the genetic mutations are that matter to you, based on good research. So you just have to work with somebody that has experience with genetics.
Yesterday you talked about a lot of metabolism type stuff. I've heard of metabolic syndrome. Was that came to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Metabolic syndrome is essentially what we're talking about. It used to be called Syndrome X, then it was called the Deadly Quartet, which is a tendency to have a slightly high blood pressure, slightly high triglycerides, low HDL, slightly high blood sugars, and extra weight around the midsection. Any three of those five is metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is very common. It's just another way of saying insulin resistance. It's the same thing. Same thing. Yes. By the way, the Betsy's in the back. If any of you want to get a book, I'm going to answer a few more questions, and then we have about 20 minutes where we can sign books or sign people up for the Diabetes Undone. Okay, the next question.
Dr.
Yes.
Youngberg,
Yeah.
We're talking about whole foods, whole plant foods, the whole plant. What are your thoughts about the GMO program that we are introducing into the plant life in America?
I'm not too happy about it. Okay, so it's there's so many new things coming up. The goal is if we could just kind of go back to how things were years ago without all the genetically modified stuff, I would be happier with that. But, you know, our goal is to do the best that we can with what's available right now. If you have the pony gene that I mentioned earlier, then we need to be much more careful to make sure we're following the advice of the Environmental Working Group that has talked about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and making sure that at least the Dirty Dozen fruits and vegetables, the ones that are most highly exposed to pesticides, are not part of our diet unless those are organically grown. Yeah.
For diabetics who supplement their sugar intake with all of these artificial sweeteners, how do you relate? I've got a particular
great
individual.
question. So what about artificial sugars? The well-established diabetes journal called Diabetes Care, arguably the best diabetes journal in medicine, a few years ago came out with a major study documenting conclusively that people who use aspartame, artificial sugars like that, dramatically increase their risk for diabetes. So the very substance that is being promoted to eat instead of sugar is actually increasing the risk of diabetes. Splenda is a sugar substitute that actually damages the healthy gut bacteria and therefore increase the risk of diabetes that way. So there's it's been said that Americans are not so much looking for healthier foods to eat than just healthier forms of junk food to eat. Okay? And so we got to be careful to not be in that category, just looking at healthier junk food to eat. We need to eat 100% plant-based foods, whole foods, not refined foods, not broken down foods, but whole foods, largely exposed to foods that are non-starchy colors, deep colors. That's what heals the body. And, if we're enjoying whole fruits, if we're enjoying nuts and seeds, if we're taking advantage of the cuisine like presented in the Diabetes Undone program, that's satisfying. That when people rely on artificial sugars and unhealthy foods, it's because they haven't learned how to enjoy real healthy food. So that's one of the benefits of the programs that are here, the monthly vegan get-togethers. They're basically teaching you how to enjoy that type of food. It's the most enjoyable way of eating is when you're eating in this way.
All right, we're going to have to let Wes go so he can do some other things before he goes. So please, let's thank Wes for this weekend.
Thank you very much.
If you can somehow snag him and ask him your question yourself, that's fine, but you'll have to risk that. So we want to let you know that we do have some room left. I'm not sure how many spots left for the Diabetes Undone program that starts tomorrow. We also have the upcoming viewing or screening of the film Eating You Alive that will occur a week from today on 3 o'clock in the afternoon at our home that you may want to sign up for as well. That's free and will be a free screening as well as a Q&A session and some samples of whole food plant-based goodies. In addition, the Vegan Gourmet Club that we have this coming Thursday at 6:30 here at the church, you're welcome to attend that as well. And we have a special guest, Dr. John Tanner, who will be giving a presentation. And the May Vegan Gourmet Club, I'll be giving a talk on sweeteners. So we'll kind of fill in stuff that Wes wasn't able to fill in for you on sweeteners and substitutes and all that type of thing. So people have been bugging me to do that for a while, so we finally got that together. So we'll give that presentation in the May Vegan Gourmet Club. All right, so thanks very much for coming. Hope you have been able to get some inspiration and maybe some tips for change, and hopefully we'll see you in some other future health programs here. So good night. Thank you very much. Yes, you can access the presentations online at the CamarilloSDA.org website. It'll be on the video archive section.